I'm sick of all this, Bernie, Jay said, setting the empty beer glass on the table. His friend sighed and took a bite of the juicy rib. Then Bernie replied, I told you right away Barbara wasn't that simple. What can you do? You're the young heir to the city's largest restaurant empire. No wonder you've got a whole crowd of beautiful women chasing after you. Jay smiled sadly. Yes, that's what I'm used to. But when I met Barbara, it seemed to me that she was different. No, Jay. She tried to be smarter than the others. She just pretended that she didn't care about your money. And then, when she realized you had fallen for her, she started demanding money. Jay sighed and began drawing patterns on the tablecloth with his fork. I started paying for Barbara's apartment, her beautician, her trainer. It wasn't hard for me to buy her clothes, cosmetics, jewelry, take her to restaurants. It was nice to please her. Jay sighed again. The second glass of beer had already gone to his head, and he wanted to share his sadness with his best friend. Did I ask for much in return? He asked Bernie. I just wanted her to love me and be honest with me, and what's worse, it's not the first time. Jay sighed. I'm so tired of this. I can't seem to trust women any more. At that moment a waiter approached them. Shall I bring another round? He asked, taking away the empty glasses. Yes, Joseph, please do, Jay answered. When the waiter brought the beer and left, Bernie smiled. I love coming to your family's restaurant, he said. The service is always top-notch. Jay grinned. Yes, it has its advantages. Bernie suddenly glanced at Joseph, who had walked up to the counter and exchanged smiles with a petite blonde waitress. Look at your waiter, said Bernie thoughtfully. Jay also looked at the couple. I doubt that question crosses his mind, he replied. What's your point? Maybe you should not tell girls who you really are when you meet them, Bernie suggested. The beer was taking its toll. You mean I should pretend to be an ordinary guy? Jay clarified. Exactly. And then, when you're sure that the girl doesn't love you for your money, you tell her everything. Can you imagine what a pleasant surprise it will be for her? Jay thought for a moment. It sounds absurd. On the other hand, why not try it? But it's not as if I know how to do it. I've never been an ordinary guy. Any girl will figure me out right away. Don't worry, we'll organize everything. For starters, you'll get a job as a waiter in one of our restaurants where no one knows you. Inexpensive clothes, shoes, phone, car. Make sure you take off your expensive watch. Jay laughed. All right, you've talked me into it. That sounds fun. Even if it doesn't work out, we'll have fun. And you'll gain invaluable experience, Bernie added. The friends spent the next few days searching for the trappings of modest living. The enterprising Bernie got a list of stores from Roma. Look how cheap everything is here, Jay said to his friend in surprise. The quality leaves much to be desired, but I have enough for the first few months. That's right, and these sneakers are nice, said Bernie, trying on a pair. I'll take those. Jay laughed. Actually, we're shopping for me, he said. Enough browsing, let's go get a phone. They bought a used smartphone at the local market, then an old Corolla from an ad. Not beat up or repainted? Asked Bernie with a businesslike grin, kicking the tyre for some reason. The seller, a sleep-deprived, unshaven, skinny young man, nodded sullenly. Of course, he replied. One owner, kept it like new. It'll run like a dream. Jay sighed, and lowering his voice, asked confidently, Will it be able to drive at least for a couple of months? The young man looked at him suspiciously but answered, 6 months for sure. Then I can't promise anything. Jay nodded. We'll take it. After they had finished with the car, there was only the apartment left. At first, Jay didn't want to do it, but his friend convinced him. You don't know how things will turn out, he said. What if circumstances work out in such a way that you have to bring a girl to your apartment? Your penthouse in your neighbourhood certainly doesn't fit the story. The argument was valid. They chose a modest one-bedroom apartment in a residential neighbourhood. The next step was to get a job at one of the nearest restaurants. Jay, as the son of the owner, was known by sight, but when he drove his new car to a neighbourhood where he had never been seen before, no one recognised him. He was hired by a young female administrator, petite, with big blue eyes and blonde hair. She reminded Jay of a schoolgirl. I wonder how old she is, he thought, but since she works as an administrator, she must be a professional. His father was strict about that. Have you worked as a waiter before? Asked the girl, whose name tag read Nancy. I have, Jay replied. A long time ago, though. He recalled a period in high school when he certainly felt the full weight of being the son of rich parents. He had entered that adolescent age when the authority of parents and teachers wanes, and you begin to feel that you and your peers are the smartest and coolest people in the world. Jay had gotten a little carried away then. His parents didn't limit his money. He took as much as he wanted. Teachers grew tired of calling and complaining about his behaviour and poor grades. Jay also started staying out late, or even overnight at his friends' houses. When his father noticed this, he called his son in for a serious talk. I used to be in favour of you taking advantage of every opportunity our family's money could provide, he began. Although your mum was against it, I thought I was teaching my only son self-reliance, responsibility, how to manage money, and most importantly, how to manage time, because it's the only truly valuable resource. But your mum was right. You weren't ready for such responsibility. I don't blame you. I was a teenager myself, but unlike you, I didn't have everything handed to me. I think it's time you learned what the real world is like. You're already 15, Jay, which means you can earn money yourself. But Dad, Jay objected, surprised. I don't want to work. His father sighed. You're right, but before we end this conversation, I'm informing you that from now on, you'll only use money you earn yourself. You still have your school meals, and we'll drive you there and back. But that's it. But Dad, my friends and I want to go out tomorrow. You can earn the money for that outing yourself. Get a good job at my restaurant as a waiter. They give good tips to those who work hard. Of course, Jay didn't want to work. His friends would have laughed at him, but Mr. Donaldson was as unapproachable as a rock. 2 weeks later, Jay asked his father to arrange a job at the restaurant. They took him without an interview, but on general terms. The owner personally instructed the manager to treat his son the same as the other waiters. At this restaurant, Jay went through a real school of life. The first 2 weeks were hard for him. He had to learn the menu, smile endlessly, and couldn't sit down for a second. He was reprimanded for every mistake because all staff in his father's restaurant had to work perfectly. He was so tired at work that he had no time for entertainment, and he still had to go to school. However, after a few months, Jay realized what his father wanted to achieve. He learned to appreciate money. He understood how ordinary people earned it. He began to value everything his family had. After that, Jay worked as a waiter until he graduated from high school, not continuously, but for a few months each year at his dad's restaurant. Of course, when he went to university, these part-time jobs had to be put on hold for a while. In the future, his father planned to hand over his entire restaurant chain to his son. But for now, that was still a long way off, and Jay used this time to gain experience and also to arrange his personal life. Anyway, I'm ready to learn quickly, Jay continued, and I'm a quick learner in general. Nancy nodded. It's none of my business, of course, but you don't look like someone applying for a waiter's job. Usually we have very young people coming in, most often students. Jay smiled. I'm only 25. I think you seem even younger. I'm 23. Jay was surprised. I didn't think it was possible to manage a restaurant like this at such a young age. I've been working at this restaurant since I was 17, the girl replied. I started as a cleaner, then a waitress, and a year ago I became a manager." "You're doing an impressive job," Jay replied. "I guess I should tell you a little about myself. Until recently I worked in an office. The company suddenly went bankrupt, and all the employees were let go. You might say, I need to pay rent, put gas in my car, and so on." Nancy seemed to ponder his words and nodded gravely. "I like people who don't give up in difficult situations and seize every opportunity," she said. "Jay, I'm hiring you." It felt like he was back in his youth. Practically nothing had changed in the restaurant as he went out into the dining area. Of course, he knew the menu practically by heart. Nancy was surprised when on his first day of training he effortlessly told guests about the most complicated dishes and gave personal recommendations. "You're the most talented waiter I've ever had," she confessed to Jay on the second day. After his first week, Jay went to a bar to meet his friend. "So," asked Bernie, "what's it like, the simple life?" "It reminds me of my college days," replied Jay, "or even high school. My legs were buzzing for the first 3 days. That's about it." "Sure, that's interesting." His friend rolled his eyes. "But I'm asking about your success with the women. I'm sure plenty of people are checking out the handsome waiter." Jay chuckled. "Bernie, it's only been a week. I haven't met many people yet." "But you have many girls at work," his friend clarified. "Well, I do. Waitresses, bartenders, customers. There are plenty I can chat with, but the only one I've liked so far is my boss." "Wow. Have you asked her out yet?" "No. Nancy made it clear from the start that she's against workplace relationships." "That's a shame." The friend leaned back on the couch and gave Jay a sly look. "I'm giving you an assignment for next week. You have to go on at least one date. Please keep in mind you didn't get a job here as a waiter. You're just playing the part of a simple guy to meet a simple girl." "Okay," Jay sighed. "I'll try." When Jay came to work the next day, the entire staff was upbeat. "Why is everyone so happy?" he asked Lisa. "Corporate Monday," the girl replied. "The day when all the staff stay after their shift and have a little party." "They still throw those?" thought Jay. Although Jay had worked in restaurants in the past, he had never attended such parties because he was underage. "May I ask you a question?" Lisa asked. She flirtatiously tossed her long red ponytail over her shoulder. "Sure," replied Jay, surprised. "Are you married?" That was unexpected. "No." "Do you have a girlfriend?" "Not either." "Lisa." "Jay," Nancy approached them. "The workday has already begun. You're chatting instead of attending to your duties." Lisa nodded, winked at Jay and turned towards the bar. She took a glass in one hand, a towel in the other, and began diligently pretending to work. Jay grabbed his clipboard, smiled guiltily at Nancy and went to a table. He suddenly realized he was pleased that Nancy had interrupted his conversation with Lisa. Did that mean she was jealous of him? That would be great. After Jay took the order, he allowed himself a glimpse of Nancy, but she was talking passionately on the phone. Judging by her serious face, the conversation was work-related, and she didn't even look at Jay. At last, the long and poorly attended Monday was over. When the doors were closed and locked behind the last guest, the red-headed Lisa slammed her towel against the counter with all her might. "Corporate Monday!" she shouted. Jay noticed that Nancy had joined in on this communal shouting as well. After that, everyone simultaneously started putting the restaurant in order and getting ready for the party. The calm, measured music for the guests was changed to something light and modern. Lisa, dancing, started mixing cocktails and pouring shots. The assistant cook was arranging plates with appetizers. Nancy was checking the day's reports. Jay approached her. "Is there anything I can do for you?" he asked Nancy. "You can," Lisa suddenly answered him. "Help me with the shots." Nancy didn't react to this, and Jay had no choice but to go help Lisa. In a few minutes they started having real fun, and Jay felt like a student again. At that moment he realized why his father had invented these corporate Mondays many years ago. Such parties united the team. He was only working here for the second week, and today he suddenly felt part of the team. Together they sang, joked, told stories, shared interesting work experiences, and, of course, drank. Nancy, although she was having fun with the rest of the group, seemed to be trying to stay away from him. The one who stayed closest to Jay was Lisa. "Do you like it here?" Lisa asked, filling another tray with shot glasses. "Yeah, it's great here." When Lisa finished, Jay deftly picked up the tray and carried it across the room. The happy employees applauded and quickly snatched up the shots. Jay returned to Lisa and placed the tray on the counter. "Good thing tomorrow's a day off," he said. She grinned. "Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't have survived." "How long have you worked here?" Jay asked, to keep the conversation going. He suddenly thought that Lisa was also a beautiful girl. Why was he so fixated on Nancy? She doesn't pay attention to him anyway. Moreover, she ignores him on purpose when he tries to approach her. And Bernie had reminded him correctly, he didn't work here as a waiter, but to meet nice girls. Why not go on a date with Lisa? She's pretty, funny, interesting, and she obviously likes him. "Almost a year," the girl answered his question. "I studied to be an economist, graduated with honours." "Congratulations," replied Jay. "And then what?" "I gave my diploma to my parents and got a job here." "No regrets?" "No," Lisa said with a smile. "Shall we drink to that?" "Let's do it." After they clinked glasses and drank, Jay thought he caught Nancy's eye for a second, but when he turned around, the receptionist was already talking to the chef about something. "You know," Lisa said thoughtfully, "I have an absolutely amazing apricot liqueur at home." "Really?" Jay replied cautiously, still not entirely sure where she was going with this. "You should definitely try it," continued the bartender. "Are you inviting me over to your place sometime?" Jake clarified. "Why, sometime," Lisa chuckled. "We could do it tonight." "Okay, whatever you say." They finished well past midnight. Jay, as one of the few who remained steady on his feet, helped the others to get in cabs and clean up the restaurant. He noticed that Nancy had stayed behind as well. "Let me call you a cab," Jay suggested to her. "I haven't been drinking. I'll take my car, but only when I've closed the restaurant myself." "You're principled," Jay grinned. "Do you always do that?" "You seem to have forgotten your girlfriend," Nancy smirked. "The last time I saw her was in the restroom. Ask if she needs help, while I'm checking everything here." Jay nodded and walked towards the restroom. Carefully, he knocked on the door. No one answered. "Lisa?" Jay called out. "Lisa, is everything okay?" Only muffled sounds came back, which he recognized with difficulty as sobbing. He had to call Nancy for help. She sighed but went to assist. "Jay, she's completely drunk. You can't get anything intelligible out of her." After a moment, he heard her swear and call out to him. "Jay, help me!" In the restroom, Nancy tried to get Lisa to her feet, who was sobbing, smearing black mascara on her face, and refusing to stand. It was impossible to get anything intelligible out of her. With barely any effort, Nancy and Jay washed her up and dragged her into the staff room. "Okay, I'll help you get her to her house. You were going to spend the night, weren't you?" Nancy said sarcastically. Jay suddenly felt himself blushing like a boy. "Uh-huh, she invited me. Anyway, thanks, Nancy. They probably won't let her in a cab." They put Lisa in the back seat of Nancy's car, with Jay sitting next to her to keep an eye on her. Nancy sighed and started the car. They drove to Lisa's apartment in complete silence. Once there, Nancy reached into the bartender's purse and pulled out the keys to the apartment. "Take care of her," she commanded Jay, and went to open the entrance. He obediently took his inebriated colleague in his arms and followed Nancy. In the apartment, they tried again to bring Lisa to her senses, but to no avail. Suddenly, the girl began to sob. "I loved him," she blurted out. 3 years, and he—" Nancy sighed, once again wiped Lisa's face with a wet towel, and handed her a paper handkerchief, which the girl immediately used. "Her boyfriend dumped her 2 weeks ago," she explained to Jay. "That's why she's so upset. Put the kettle on." Jay didn't need to be told twice. He quickly rushed to the kitchen and then came back. Nancy was already stroking the girl's head and murmuring comforting words. Lisa responded incoherently, paying no attention to Jay. They stayed with her for almost 2 more hours, until Lisa regained her composure and calmed down a little. When she fell asleep, Nancy and Jay quickly left the apartment and closed the door behind them. "Let me give you a ride," Nancy suggested, "or you won't be able to get a cab at this hour." "But you'll get home later," he said. "Don't worry, I'm used to it." In the car, Jay decided to break the awkward silence. "I didn't realize that corporate Mondays were so eventful," he said. Nancy grinned. "This is still the light version. It's a good thing they're only once every 2 months. Otherwise, I'd go crazy." "I understand. I'm sorry." Nancy looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For Lisa. That you had to waste so much time on us. For this whole situation." "It's not the first time this has happened with Lisa. She's a good bartender, but she's very sensitive, and she goes through a breakup like this once every month or 3. Jay grinned. "That explains it. I thought she really liked me, but it turns out I was just supposed to be her shoulder to cry on." "I'm sorry to disappoint you. I can't be responsible for Lisa. You'll talk to her the day after tomorrow and find out her true intentions. Maybe your sympathy for her will be mutual after all." "I don't have any sympathy for her," Jay blurted out, then corrected himself. "I mean, she's nice, of course, but I liked another girl in that restaurant." Despite the darkness in the car, he saw the administrator's cheeks turn pink. "Who is she?" "You." "Then why were you flirting with Lisa?" "She started it. I tried paying attention to you at first, but you were obviously about not liking me." "I wasn't," Nancy started, but immediately cut herself short. "We're here." She pulled up to his driveway, stopped the car, and suddenly yawned. "Maybe you'll come to my place. Have some coffee?" Jay asked. "I'm worried about how you'll get home." "Okay," Nancy nodded, rubbing her eyes vigorously. "You have a nice apartment," she said, taking a seat on the couch. "You should see my real apartment," Jay thought, but didn't say anything aloud. "It'll be ready in 5 minutes," he said, and went into the kitchen. There was a good coffee maker standing there. Bernie had been against it, saying it was too expensive and suspicious, but Jay had insisted that he couldn't live without good coffee. When everything was ready, Jay returned to the room to call Nancy. She was already asleep, curled up. He gently covered her with a plaid and settled himself in the chair. He woke up because he felt his back stiffen. Opening his eyes, he saw that the couch was empty. Listening, he realized that there were sounds coming from the kitchen. Jay got up, rubbed his back, and went to investigate. "Good morning," Nancy said. "Breakfast will be ready soon." He rubbed his eyes. "What did you make this out of?" "I went to the store. You have nothing at all. What do you eat?" Mentally, Jay praised himself for taking out the trash before work yesterday. Otherwise, Nancy would have seen a pile of packages from ready-made meals and would definitely have wondered, how does a former office worker, now a waiter who's only been working for 2 weeks, afford expensive delicacies? "I've been busy. I was planning to go shopping today," he said. On my day off, usually I eat at work. How much do I owe you? Nancy waved her hand dismissively. Nothing at all. I just made an omelette, oatmeal and coffee. They sat down to breakfast. Delicious, Jay replied. If you don't want to work as an administrator, you should become a cook. I'd be happy to give you recommendations. Nancy laughed. Thank you for such a generous offer. I'll keep that in mind. After breakfast, Nancy went home. Jay suggested she stay to watch a movie, or perhaps go for a walk, but she declined. We had a lovely breakfast, Nancy said, but I'm sorry I have things to do. See you tomorrow. The next day, Jay had to deal with 2 girls at once. He decided not to drag it out and started with Lisa. Hi, he said to her. How are you feeling? Hi, I'm fine. Do you expect me to apologize for my behavior? No, Jay replied. I just want to know how you're doing. I'm fine. I made up with my boyfriend yesterday. That's great. Good for you, Jay said. Well, shall I go? Yeah, Lisa replied indifferently and turned away to get something from the shelf. Jay wanted to go to Nancy, but saw that guests had already sat down at his table. Forcing a smile, he hurried over and was horrified to see his university buddies, Dennis and Anton, sitting there. Wow, Jay! Anton exclaimed in surprise. What are you doing here? Jay looked around. Fortunately, none of the staff was nearby. The neighbouring tables were empty. Hi, he said to his buddies. Stop ruining my legend. I'm undercover here. No one on the staff can know who I really am. You're about to blow my cover with your shouting. The guys looked at each other, and then Dennis whistled delightedly. Well, Mr. Donaldson outdid himself, he gasped. He always comes up with something interesting. But to send his own son to work as a waiter, to check on the restaurant, that's something. Quiet, Anton hissed. Jay said no one must know. Dennis nodded and lowered his voice. Jay, how's the food here? Is it okay? Jay nodded. Relax, everything's top-notch. What will you order? The usual? Jay feared that his old pal's enthusiasm over this unexpected encounter might attract unwanted attention. Fortunately, none of the staff noticed anything suspicious. After Dennis and Anton had left, and he had served several more tables, Jay finally found a moment to approach Nancy. Hi, Jay said. How are you? She smiled. Good. Did you buy groceries? Or are you still hoping for our kitchen? I did. You can check it out for yourself. Is this your way of inviting me over? That's bold, but please keep in mind I'm still your boss. I haven't forgotten, Jay said. We could just go for a walk first. The weather's nice. He suddenly realized he couldn't remember the last time he had asked a girl out on a simple date. Not to an expensive restaurant or some fancy outing like horseback riding or a hot air balloon ride. Just walking around the city. That's a great idea, Nancy said suddenly. I'd love to. The idea was indeed great. Jay had never thought it could be so enjoyable to just walk with a girl through the evening city and talk about everything under the sun. Tell me about your family, he asked. You're so mysterious and I don't know where to start. Nancy laughed. I'm almost sorry to destroy this aura of mystery you've inexplicably surrounded me with, but I have to. So, I was born and raised in a small town, about an hour's bus ride from here. My mum's an elementary school teacher, and my dad's a storekeeper. Oh, that's great, replied Jay. I can see why you're so good at organising people and keeping records, and also why you're so responsible. Nancy rolled her eyes instead of answering. I'm the eldest daughter in the family, she continued. My younger sister Anna will be in 11th grade this year, and my brother will be in 5th. So, you're from a large family? She nodded. And you? No, I'm an only child, he answered. What do your mum and dad do? Nancy asked. Jay had been preparing for this question. My mum does housework, and my dad has his own little cafe, far away, almost outside the city. Oh, Nancy laughed. So, you're from a rich family? Jay laughed. I wouldn't say that. Just an ordinary one. Just like me, she replied. You said you've been working here since you were 16. How did that happen? My father fell seriously ill. We needed money fast, so I came to the city. Originally, I had planned to go to college, but I decided to get a job instead. At 17, nobody would hire me except here, where the previous administrator took pity on me and hired me as a cleaner. You know the rest of my career path. And you never thought about going to college later? Jay asked. Nancy smiled. I think about it from time to time, but I can't afford it yet. My father has recovered now, and they don't need my help as much. Still, I know that as long as I work here, it'll be easier for my parents. Plus, my sister is starting university soon. She'll probably live with me. Do you always think of others first? He asked. When do you think about yourself? Nancy laughed. Who says I don't think about myself? Firstly, I'm happy when my loved ones are happy. Secondly, I'm 23 and already the administrator of the largest restaurant chain in the city. Maybe I'll become a manager next. Is that so bad? Jay grinned. The prospect is tempting. But what if I'm still just a waiter by then? Would you still date me? Dating? She interjected. We're just going out after work. But it's a date, Jay objected stubbornly. You're not going to argue with that, are you? Okay, Nancy sighed. Let it be a date. I'm sure it is, said Jay. And people go on dates to start dating. It's impossible to argue with you, she said. You're awfully stubborn. And that, he replied, is just the beginning of what you're learning about me. Although Nancy argued that it was too early to draw conclusions from one date, Jay was sure everything was going well. It was great to just walk around without worrying about making an impression, fretting over restaurant choices or flower bouquet sizes. Most importantly, he didn't have to worry whether the girl's feelings for him were sincere or if she was just waiting for the right moment to ask for money. With Nancy, everything felt real. At work, they tried not to show their feelings, but Jay felt the air between them was charged with invisible threads binding them together. Sometimes he even felt he could sense her gaze on his back. After the first date, they went on a second, then a third, then a fourth. When Nancy was preparing breakfast in Jay's apartment, he had bought groceries this time. He asked, So, can we consider ourselves dating now? Or are you still being stubborn? She laughed and playfully swatted him with a kitchen towel. Joker, Nancy muttered, feigning annoyance. Well, if it's so important to you, we can consider us dating. It is important to me, Jay said seriously, putting his arm around her waist and kissing her temple. Then he jokingly asked, So you'll still date me if you become a restaurant manager and I remain a simple waiter? Nancy sighed. Of course I will, silly, she replied. I don't care what job you have or where you work. Over the weekend he met up with Bernie. Lately, he and his best friend had hardly seen each other, only occasionally exchanging messages. This time, Jay himself called and suggested they meet up, like in the old days. His friend gladly agreed. Well, Bernie asked after they had hugged and sat at their usual table, It's been a while. You must have had good reasons for neglecting your best friend. Jay laughed. I'm sorry. It's wonderful to see you. And you're right, as always, there were reasons. You're in love. Bernie didn't even ask. He simply stated the fact. That's right, Jay replied. You're right again. Who is she? Your boss? Yes, Her name is Nancy, and she's astonishing." For the next hour, Jay told Bernie everything that had happened between him and Nancy over the last few months. "I'm happy for you," Bernie replied. "I don't want to rush things, but it seems you've really met the one this time. So, what's your next step?" "I'm going to propose to her," Jay answered without hesitation. "Already? Aren't you moving a bit fast?" "No, I'm sure." Okay. I won't try to discourage you. So, how do you plan to do it? Rent the whole restaurant for only both of you? Whisk her away to the Maldives? Buy her thousands of roses?" Jay smiled. "Nothing like that. I'll buy a nice ring and propose to her in the kitchen of my apartment." "Doesn't sound very romantic. Are you sure?" "Totally." "And when are you going to reveal all your cards to her?" "I wouldn't play the game for long." "I haven't decided yet. You're the one who came up with this whole disguise thing. So now, don't push me. I need time to find the right time." Okay, he sighed. "Do as you please. I won't say another word." "Your pancakes are the best," Jay said to Nancy later in the evening. "Normal people eat them for breakfast," she replied, "but you asked me to make them for dinner. I wanted something unusual because it's a special dinner tonight." "And what's so special about it?" Nancy asked. Jay slipped his hand into his pocket and in one deft movement quickly pulled something out and placed it on Nancy's ring finger. "Will you be my wife?" he asked. Nancy blinked in amazement. "Aren't you moving too fast?" she asked. "No," Jay answered confidently. "Maybe I'm being too impulsive and reckless," she said, "but I'll accept." "Really?" Jay couldn't believe his luck. "I remembered what you said about living for yourself sometimes, and I want to be your wife." Half an hour later, they had already started discussing a new topic. "I should introduce you to my parents," Nancy said firmly. "Sure, I'm all for it." She thought for a moment. "In 3 days they both have the day off. I'll go home in the evening and prepare them. You can come the next morning." "Okay, honey, whatever you say." Jay looked up directions in advance to the town where Nancy's parents lived. However, his plans were thwarted by his car, which flatly refused to start. "Oh, come on," he sighed. "That mechanic promised it would last 6 months." At first, he considered calling a cab or renting another car. Then he realized he wouldn't be able to explain such expenses to Nancy and her parents. Jay began to think of alternative ways to get there. He found a bus route that went to his destination. Jay had probably only taken the bus during his school days, so now he felt a bit anxious about boarding, buying a ticket, and finding the right seat. He sat down by the window and was about to put his headphones in when a woman's voice sounded nearby. "I believe I'm sitting next to you." Jay turned and saw a tall, black-haired woman in her 40s, looking at him with a smile. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about her, except her eyes, large, black and deep. Her gaze seemed to scan Jay from head to toe. "Did I take your seat?" Jay asked. "I'm sorry. I don't think I quite understood the ticket system." She smiled and shook her head, then sat down. "Do you rarely take the bus?" she asked. "Yeah," Jay replied. "I usually drive, but my car broke down at the worst time." "Everything happens for a reason. Have you ever wondered how your life would have turned out if not for a series of strange coincidences and spontaneous decisions? Perhaps in that case, you wouldn't be on this bus right now." "You sound like a philosopher," Jay remarked. She laughed. "No one's ever called me that before, but it sounds intriguing. You seem a little worried." "Is it that obvious?" "Maybe not to the untrained eye, but I can see it. I can see why you're worried." "Are you a psychic?" he asked jokingly. "You could say that," the woman replied. Okay, this conversation is getting interesting. Why am I worried? Because you're living someone else's life, pretending to be something you're not. You wanted to just play around, and now it's gone so far that you don't know how to get out of it. You found what you've been looking for through deception, and now you're afraid you're going to lose it when the truth comes out. Jay swallowed nervously. She's probably just a good psychologist, he tried to reassure himself. Or she said the first thing that came to her mind, and by some incredible coincidence guessed it. The woman seemed to read his thoughts and grinned. You can think of me however you want, she said. The reality of the situation won't change. Jay tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Since you know everything, he said, what advice do you have for me? How can I reveal the truth and keep what's precious? There's a price to pay for everything in this life, she said. And for deception too. The only thing I can advise you, don't drag it out, or it will be too late. The bus driver stopped suddenly, and the woman looked out the window. My stop, she said, and stood up. And I might add that every evil, deceit, and resentment in this world can only be resisted by one force. And what is that? Asked Jay. The power of love, replied the woman. And don't turn on your music or you'll miss your stop. You get off at the next one. She left the bus so quickly that Jay didn't have an opportunity to ask anything else. He pondered her words and, despite the warning, almost missed his stop. Meeting Nancy's parents went smoothly. Jay was pleased to see her large, friendly family. Nancy's sister Anna regarded him with undisguised curiosity, repeatedly asking how they met. Her younger brother eagerly pulled Jay into his room, offering to play computer games together. Nancy's mother was genuinely happy for her daughter, constantly offering the future son-in-law various snacks. The future father-in-law seemed unable to believe his older daughter had matured enough to marry and was endearingly concerned. In this warm, attentive environment, Jay found himself unable to reveal his true identity. He couldn't fathom their potential reactions, especially Nancy's. He knew her well enough to understand how much she valued sincerity and honesty. They adore you, Nancy said as they drove back. The first guy I've introduced to my parents, and it's already such a success. Wow, Jay replied. So I'm the first to be honoured? I wasn't really into relationships before, she smiled. With you it just happened naturally. I see. If I hadn't gotten work at the restaurant, I wouldn't have had a chance to meet you. Perhaps. Well, I'm glad that a chain of events led me to our restaurant that day. I'm overjoyed too. The next day, Jay met Bernie. Well, buddy, you're getting serious now, Bernie exhaled when Jay recounted everything. You realise the next step is meeting your parents, right? Are you going to ask Mr. Donaldson and your mum to pretend to be simple pensioners? They certainly won't do that. I know it's time to tell the truth, but I can't figure out how. By the way, Bernie added, I've been meaning to ask, how does your father feel about you working as a waiter for several months? I haven't told him yet. I just said I'm studying the restaurant business from the inside, Jay replied. He has no objection to that. All right, you sly dog. Just make sure it's not too late, his friend warned. You're not planning to pretend to be a waiter in front of Nancy forever, are you? Jay smiled. Why not? I'm happier now than I've ever been. I wasn't this content when I was the heir to a huge business. Now I live in a tiny one-room apartment, drive an old, constantly breaking down car, and earn in a month what I used to spend in one evening. Yet I'm dating the most beautiful girl in the world. That's what's important in life. I'm truly happy for you, friend, Bernie said. Just don't forget that Nancy isn't dating you, but a non-existent waiter. I'll tell her, Jay vowed. I will. Days passed, but he still couldn't bring himself to fulfill his promise. It always seemed the right moment never came. Sometimes work was busy, other times they'd start watching a romantic movie at home, and he didn't want to spoil the mood. Jay realized these were all excuses. He was simply afraid. He feared that honest, open, sincere Nancy wouldn't forgive such deception. The longer he procrastinated, the more guilt he felt. The words of that strange fortune-teller from the bus also lingered in his memory. She had warned him that it might be too late at some point. Okay, Jay said to himself one morning. I'll tell her everything today, after work. The day progressed as usual. Few visitors in the afternoon. A quiet and peaceful time when one could relax without rushing to serve everyone. Lost in thought, Jay approached the next table and nearly lost his ability to speak. There sat his father. Well, hello, son. Mr. Donaldson greeted him coldly. Hello, Dad, Jay replied, placing the menu in front of his guest. I've been wondering where my heir has been spending his time these past months, not even visiting his parents. And then suddenly, a strange rumour reaches me that he's working as a simple waiter in my own restaurant. What are you doing here, Dad? Jay asked. Instead of answering, Mr. Donaldson stopped Cindy, a waitress who was passing by. Cindy, if you would be so kind, said the father, please get us an administrator. Cindy glanced fearfully at Jay, but immediately smiled professionally and replied, Certainly, one moment. What do you intend to do? Jay asked, startled. Nothing illegal, his father smiled. At that moment, Nancy approached their table. Good afternoon, Mr. Donaldson, she greeted. I'm glad to see you. And I'm glad to see you, Nancy, he replied. How are you doing here? Everything is fine and under control. I'm glad. By the way, how do you like my son? Is he doing well? Nancy blinked in confusion. Your son? Mr. Donaldson nodded at Jay. My son, who has been working for you as a waiter for several months now, and as I recently learned, he has proposed to you, right? Nancy froze in place. Jay didn't know what to do. I'm sorry, he said. I've been meaning to tell you for a long time, but I just couldn't find the right moment. He mumbled and saw tears welling up in the girl's eyes. I beg your pardon, Mr. Donaldson, she murmured. I must step aside for a moment. She almost ran out of the hall. The restaurant owner looked at his son. Is there anything you want to tell me? He asked. What's there to tell? Jay frowned. You already know everything. Yes, and I had to hear about it from you, my son. Not only have you been neglecting your duties for months, but you're marrying my restaurant employee. Our restaurant, Dad, Jay said. And why are you making such a big deal out of it? I'm doing what you've always wanted me to do, learning your business from the inside, from the bottom up. I'm building rapport with the team. And as for Nancy, that's my personal life. It doesn't concern you. And since we started this conversation, I'll finish. Nancy is the most amazing girl I've ever met. More than anything, I want to be with her. If I had to choose going back to my old life or staying with her and working as a simple waiter, I'd choose her in a heartbeat. Here, Mr. Donaldson reacted in a way that Jay didn't expect at all. He smiled. I'm proud of you, son, the father said. Perhaps I didn't always raise you right, and I wasn't always there when you needed me. Forgive me for that. Despite all my mistakes, you've grown up to be a wonderful person. I'm proud of you." He stood up and hugged his son. "Now, go after her," Mr. Donaldson said. "I've known Nancy for a long time. She really is a wonderful girl." Jay nodded and ran. He quickly realized where to look for her. Nancy was sitting in her car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. He opened the passenger door and sat down next to her. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I'm really sorry." Nancy sighed, but didn't say anything. Has that woman's prediction come true? He thought with horror. Am I too late? How could you even think of such a thing? She said angrily. Don't you realize how stupid that was? Jay smiled. I realize it now, but at the time when my friend and I came up with the idea, I thought it was awfully clever. I felt as if I'd gone on the most interesting adventure of my life. Ever since I was a child, I was just the son of rich parents. That was my main characteristic. Everything else, my personality, my looks, my accomplishments, always took a back seat. It's difficult to live like that when you see girls see your father's fortune first and then you. I wanted so much to be someone else. A simple guy who could be loved for his sense of humour and kindness, not for paying for apartments or designer shoes. I guess I can understand that, Nancy admitted. But you could have told me long ago. I introduced you to my whole family. I thought you were real. Nancy, Jay said, trying to put all his love into his words. I was real. My declarations of love, my kisses, my proposal. It was all real and came from the heart. It was I who proposed to you, not the son of a restaurant empire heir, not the waiter, but me, Jay. I should have told you long ago, he said. I know, but I was so scared, you have no idea. Every day, I felt like I was merging more and more with my new, made-up image. I think I started to forget who I was before because it was so great to be this new Jay. Working in a young, cool team, living in a cosy little apartment that I could clean with my own hands, and dating the most wonderful girl who was willing to be with me even if I stayed a waiter and she became the restaurant manager. Actually, I was going to promote you to administrator, she said, taking advantage of my position. Jay smiled. And now I can use my position of authority to promote you to manager. No, I want to earn that position honestly. Whatever you say, especially since my father is thrilled with you as it is. Really? Yes, I didn't know you two knew each other. Yes, Mr. Donaldson sometimes comes to our restaurant. Well, Jay summarized, you already know your future father-in-law, and my mum is a real sweetheart. You're going to love her. Actually, I haven't said I forgive you yet, she said. I have an excellent argument for it, Jay replied. Remember when we discussed our wedding? Of course. So? So, now we won't have to take a loan out for it, and you can buy yourself any dress you want. And you don't have to shorten the guest list anymore. Call everyone, even anyone you went to kindergarten with. Nancy laughed. Well, you're a sly one. These arguments are wonderful, but in fact, only one thing will make me agree. And what's that? You promise you'll never lie to me again, Nancy said. I promise, replied Jay solemnly, ready to seal the promise with a kiss. Nancy laughed. Accepted, she replied and reached for him. When they entered the restaurant, they found the entire staff had gathered and was waiting for them. Congratulations, everyone shouted with glee, and several champagne corks popped. Nancy shrieked in surprise, clung to Jay, then looked at him with her huge blue eyes and laughed. And at that moment, he felt like the happiest man in the world.